Throughout the NBA's long history, there have been legends of the game, players who have influenced the game more than others, players who have won more championships than others, more MVPs than others. And the hardest part about ranking NBA players is the game has become positionless to this point. So there's so many players that we have seen that can play almost every single position, and it's been that way for a while now. When we go and talk about other sports like football, we can talk about the best quarterbacks, we can talk about the best linebackers, the best wide receivers. When we talk about basketball players, there's only 5 on the court at a time, and there's so many that have influenced the game as well. So today I'm going to be going over my top 10 NBA players of all time, and I know some of you guys are going to disagree with this, some more than others. So make sure to let me know down below what you guys would change, and let's start this video off. Before this video starts, the NBA playoffs are starting very soon, with teams making their final pushes before the postseason. Make sure you're there to see your favorite team make their playoff push. Is your team already eliminated? Don't worry, plenty of artists are on tour right now, and the MLB season is starting soon. Whatever your choice of entertainment is, SeatGeek has tickets for you, and if you use our code NEXTMANUP, you can get $20 off your first purchase of $20 or more. A pretty good. Starting off this list, we have the most influential basketball player of all time in Steph Curry. You won't be able to write the story of the NBA or basketball as a whole without Curry. Steph came into the game and has helped turn the game upside down. The three-point line has been in the game since 1979, but it wasn't revolutionized until the early 2000s. When the game started to change, it's up for debate, but Curry being the biggest face of the three-point movement is undebatable. His legacy has been solidified in the history books as the greatest shooter of all time, and with his most recent championship in 2022, he has risen up the all-time list for me. Curry could easily end up higher on this list by the time he retires, and I would welcome any debate on him being higher than 10 all-time. And like I previously mentioned, that ring in 2022 definitely helped his legacy a lot, because before that, they did lose in the finals to the Cavs, and the championships that he got before, he did get one the year before KD got there, and then they got 2 while he was there, but he didn't win finals MVP the one season that KD wasn't there. So that last championship definitely helped boosted his legacy, showing that he was the face of the Warriors franchise and will be for probably the rest of the Warriors franchise history. He will be the face of that team. So starting off this list, we have Steph Curry. Our next player is also synonymous with one franchise, this man being Larry Bird. Curry may have dominated the game with the Warriors for a stretch, but Bird has him beat, being one of 3 players to ever win 3 MVPs in a row. Larry Legend has a stacked resume, which is pretty comparable to Curry's, but he does have the edge in the individual stats, and now with the extra MVP, Finals MVP, and over double the amount of all NBA first team selections. Like I said before, these guys are very close in resume, but Bird has the defensive advantage with 3 defensive team selections, which gives him the edge here. Bird's only gripe all time happens to be something that Curry can relate to, being a rivalry with another player who got the best of him. Bird just happened to play in the same era as Magic and the beginning of Jordan's career, which knocks him down a little bit here, as both of those players, as we'll see, are going to be on this list, but still a top 10 player of all time. And like I said, these guys very close in resume, and like I said earlier, Curry definitely up for debate. So either of these guys, I think you could switch back and forth, but both of these guys definitely in the top 10 to start off. In the 8th spot, we have the most mysterious athlete the game has ever seen. The only man to score 100 in a game, the only man to average 50 points in a season and 25 rebounds and still somehow not win MVP in that season. If we're going purely based off of stats, Wilt Chamberlain would be the best basketball player of all time. 4-time MVP, 13-time All-Star, but he was only able to hold up the championship twice, which is why he happens to be this low. He also played during a time period where, when we look back, it's the dark days of basketball. Not very many teams, not as competitive as the 90s, as the 80s, as the 2000s, as modern day basketball, and it's not his fault necessarily, but the time when he was playing, there wasn't very many teams, and he was the tallest player at the time, obviously with Bill Russell during that time period as well, but not his fault. He just happens to play during that time period, which is why he is that low on this list. He's still a top 10 player of all time, but that's why we can't base everything just on stats. And he also only won 2 championships, which if we look at the rest of players on this list, we have players that have won multiple championships, 4, 5, 6 championships once we get later down the road. And if we base this just off of players and their stats, if we had a player that came into basketball today and averaged 50 points per game, we would crown them probably the best person to ever touch a basketball. But like I said, back in that time period, he was able to put up those stats, which is very impressive, but we also don't have as much film during that time, if any, for some of these games as well, which is why he comes in at 8 on this list. Now, I would be very surprised if this number 7 spot isn't greeted with some type of backlash. I think people down below will either completely agree with my take here or completely disagree with it. I have Kobe Bryant here at number 7. And there was a while where I believe a lot of people had Kobe in that top 5, the top 3, right after he died, which I completely understand. And I don't want to take anything away from Kobe, as he's still one of the best players of all time. But when we're talking about the best players of all time, we have to go into these stats. We have to go into the best players during a time period. And if we talk about these players, Draymond Green said it the best. When he was on a podcast, he said the reason why Kobe Bryant isn't seen as the GOAT in many people's eyes is he came during a time period where the beginning of his career, he was with Shaq. They won 3 titles, but he didn't win any finals MVPs. He wasn't the best player on the team. Shaq was. So then he goes out later and he wins MVPs, and he goes out and wins 2 finals MVPs. He won regular season MVP, and over this time period, when he was starting to become the best player in the league, that's when LeBron came out and blossomed into the best player in the league. And obviously the start of Kobe's career, MJ still playing, also Shaq during that time period, and towards the end of his career, LeBron the best player in the world, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. Kobe came in the time period where he played with some of the greatest players in the game, and there were time periods where he wasn't the best player in the league. Though he was very consistent with his points, a lot of people love to point out that he wasn't consistent as a player, with some nights having very good shooting performances, some nights not being that great, but it's the Mamba mentality that he had. He would just keep shooting. Kobe Bryant, still one of the best players of all time, but he comes this low because there were points in his career where he just wasn't the best player because he was playing of and against and with some of the best players in the NBA, but still arguably a top 10 player of all time. I think this is the lowest that I would feel comfortable putting Kobe Bryant. Now, next up on this list, I have Shaq. And some of you guys might agree and say, Shaq is, yes, he's a very good player. He's better than Kobe Bryant all time. Some may disagree. And I think this is the part of the list where I'm going to see the most backlash. So preparing for this down below in the comments. But my case for Shaquille O'Neal being the better player is when we look at the best peaks of players of all time, Shaq has the best. We can argue Wilt Chamberlain statistically, maybe Kareem. LeBron had a very good peak. LeBron was a consistent player though. Jordan retired during his prime as well. Shaquille O'Neal had the most dominant prime that we have ever seen in the NBA. And yes, he had some bad years to end his career, and that's why I don't have him higher. He had a good enough career from Orlando all the way to the end of Miami where he could easily be a top 3 player of all time if he retired and maybe those later years in his career didn't happen, but he was still a good player during that time period. When we look at Phoenix, he made the All-NBA 3rd team as a 36-year-old. He was an all-star, so it's not like he was going out there. The only time that he was really going out there and just putting up shots just to get the money or whatever it was at the time, and he wasn't in a playing shape, was Boston, which he was 38 years old. He was at the end of his career. But this guy came in top 10 in MVP voting almost every single season of his career from his rookie year. He came out from the jump, won Rookie of the Year, was 7th in MVP voting as a rookie, 23 points per game, 14 rebounds. This guy was dominant, 3.5 blocks. And like I said, when he was playing with Kobe, he won the Finals MVP 3 times in a row, all 3 years, and that's the reason why I have him above Kobe all time. They also have the same amount of MVPs, and they both played for arguably the same amount of time. Kobe came a little bit later after, obviously, when he went to LA, but both of these guys, fantastic players, so I'm interested to see what you guys think between Shaq and Kobe, but I do have Shaq here as the 6th spot above Kobe. Now, starting off the top 5, this is where it starts to get interesting a little bit with my number 5. The top 3, I'm sure you guys will figure out, and whatever order we see it in, I'm sure you guys already know who those 3 players are. But my number 5 player of all time, I think there's a lot of people that say this player is good, but I honestly think over time he has become one of the most underrated players of all time, and we love to point out things now in the NBA with aura. I think if this player had more aura or swag, whatever you want to call it, he would be higher all time. But this is the most consistent basketball player of all time in Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is a top 5 NBA player of all time. He's a top 5 basketball player of all time. When we talk about Tim Duncan, he is the only player to be selected to both the All-NBA and All-Defensive team for 13 consecutive seasons from the start of his career all the way down until his 13th season, which is insane to talk about. On top of that, 3-time Finals MVP, 2-time regular season MVP, 5-time NBA champion, and overall 15 All-Star games, 15 All-NBA teams, and 15 All-Defensive teams. This guy is the most consistent basketball player that we have ever seen. Yes, he may not be the greatest, most prolific scorer that we saw, as he had many seasons where he was averaging about 20 points, but that doesn't mean that he's not one of the best players that we've ever seen. Maybe he didn't have that dominant prime that a guy like Shaq would have, putting up 35 points per game, a guy like LeBron would, a guy that even like Steph Curry would. Maybe he's not the greatest scorer of all time, but he got it done in every single facet of the game. Would you rather have a guy that goes out there and maybe puts up an inconsistent 33 points per game, or would you rather have a guy that can go out there, gets you nearly 25 points, 12 rebounds, and 2.5 to 3 blocks a game for 15 straight seasons? A guy that can make all NBA and all defensive team for 13 of his first 13 seasons in a row. Tim Duncan is the most consistent basketball player of all time, and let's cue the clip because I know you guys are waiting for that one.
Put the ball on the floor. He can do turnarounds. He has one of the best footworks inside.
You have no idea how good Tim Duncan was. Oh my God.
At number 4, we have Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson was considered the LeBron before the LeBron that we have right now. A 12-time All-Star, 3-time MVP, 3-time Finals MVP, 5-time champion. And this was during arguably the most competitive era in basketball during the 80s and then the early 90s when he was playing, even though he did retire during the beginning of the 90s, right before that Bulls dynasty really started. But going up against Larry Bird, that rivalry was crazy. That rivalry between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird brought the NBA to the popularity that it has now. And Magic Johnson may not be the greatest scorer of all time by any means, but a guy that can give you 20, 8, and 11 per night is a guy that any single team would want going out there, and he would step it up in the playoffs as well, as he was a 3-time Finals MVP over his 5 championships that he got, proving that even with Kareem on the team, he still was the best guy at points, and he did everything that he needed to do. He may not have been a score-first player, which is why he has those LeBron comparisons, a very big guard, being a 6'9" point guard, which at the time, no one really knew what to do against him. Obviously, in my opinion, the best passer of all time, and also putting up 20 points per game and 7 rebounds, and also getting a few steals. He was just the guy during his time period, obviously with Larry Bird there, but getting the best of Larry Bird in most of the occasions, shooting 52% from the field, and one of the best players that we've seen in the game of basketball, and definitely helping rise the popularity of basketball to what it is today. Now, starting off the top 3, this is where we get into the top 3 players of all time, obviously, but these 3 players are the only 3 players that I will hear a debate about the best player in basketball's history. Anyone outside of these top 3, I'm not going to listen to the argument because I just don't really think there is. I think these 3 guys have the best case, and if you gave me a good enough reason for any of these 3 guys to be the greatest player of all time, which I think you easily could, I would honestly maybe not agree with you, but I could see where you're coming from. And number 3 being Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And when we're talking about winning, when we're talking about basketball, he is the best winner of all time. Obviously, in college, he was a multiple-time champion, bringing UCLA to become one of the best dynasties during that time period, and then translating into the NBA. 15-time All-NBA, 6-time NBA champion, 6-time MVP, 11-time All-Defensive, Rookie of the Year, 19-time All-Star, 2-time scoring champion, 4-time block champion, 2 times final MVP. This guy was the scoring leader as well, and we never thought that was going to get broken until obviously LeBron James came in and did it within the past few years. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, still a top 3 player of all time, a winner, and one of the best players that we have ever seen touch a basketball. 6-time champion and 6-time MVP alone, I think easily puts him in the top 5 debate. And then if you consider everything else that he did during his career, also helping bring popularity to basketball as a sport and being a great person outside of the court, bringing so much to the game on and off the court. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one of the best players we have ever seen and one of the best scorers we have ever seen, having a massive career of 20 seasons. This guy went out there and got it done every single season as well, being an all-star up until his final season, only averaging 10 points in that final season. Did he deserve it completely? I don't know. I wasn't a voter in 1989, but this guy, a fantastic player all time with those 19-time All-Stars. Just one of the best players we have ever seen in the game. Now, starting off the top 2, there's only 2 guys I can have here. And at number 2, yes, I have Michael Jordan here, which I know some of you may be surprised to see, but I do have Michael Jordan at number 2. And looking at this, we all know the story of Michael Jordan. A 5-time MVP, 6-time champion, 6-time finals MVP, 6-0 in the finals. And yes, he did retire during the prime of his career. Would he have won more championships? Maybe. But obviously, this isn't hypothetical. He won as many as he did, and 6 championships is still good enough to become one of the best players of all time, and the best player of all time for a good amount of time. I had him as the best player in NBA history for a while until the past few years. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset about this placement. If I had him at 1, LeBron fans would have been mad about that. If I had him at 2, LeBron fans would be happy, but then Jordan fans would be happy that he's number 2 here. And overall, yes, I didn't get to watch Michael Jordan play in his prime. I've gone back and watched these games, but the main reason why I have him at number 2 now, besides having LeBron at number 1, is a plethora of different things. But obviously being able to see LeBron play in his prime and play over the past 10 seasons has been a big reason why I have him where he is now. And maybe if I got to watch Michael Jordan during that time period, maybe I'd have him higher. But when I'm looking at the stats and when I'm looking at everything else, obviously Michael Jordan is still one of the top 2 players of all time. And either way you look at it, yes, some people are going to be upset that he's not the greatest player of all time in my list, and you may have him as the greatest player of all time, and I wouldn't disagree with you. Though I do have LeBron James at number 1. I think there's easily an argument you can make, like I said, for any of these top 3 guys. I just personally have him at number 2, and I think the main thing that people have been upset about whenever we have this Jordan and LeBron debate is I feel like people don't understand. Saying that someone is the second best player to ever touch a basketball is not disrespectful. That's saying that he is a top 2 person to ever touch a basketball in the history of the NBA and basketball as a sport in general. So whoever you have at number 1 and number 2, obviously it's not very disrespectful, as they are a top 2 player to ever touch a basketball, which hundreds of millions have touched prior to that. I do have Michael Jordan at number 2 though. Now, my number 1 player of all time, like I said, is LeBron James. And yes, it may be because I've been able to watch him in his prime play throughout his whole entire career. Yes, I've been able to watch the back half of his career from age 30 on pretty much, even a little bit before that. But actually being able to sit down and watch him come back down 3-1, being able to see him go to 8-9 straight finals in a row, seeing him go back and win a championship in Los Angeles. And he's had that same kind of career path as Tom Brady, where every single season people saying, oh, this is the last season he's going to be able to dominate. Oh, after this one, he's going to be done for. There's no way that he can come out and perform at a high level after this season again. But he just continues to go out there and get it done every single season. Watching LeBron James on the court, it seems like there's nothing that he can't do. And obviously watching him now in his older ages, there's things that he can't do that he used to be able to do before. But a 4-time MVP, a 20-time All-NBA, 20-time All-Star, 4-time Finals MVP. Yes, he may not have the championships that Jordan does. Yes, he got to the championship, he lost those final series. But when we look at that, from an individual basketball player standpoint, there are so many series in the finals that he led his team or both teams in points, rebounds, assists. And like I said before, Jordan may have won more rings, hypothetically. LeBron could have won more rings if he didn't run into Kevin Durant and the Warriors during that time period, hypothetically. But with what we have now, the combination of everything, LeBron James was a pass-first player, and he just happens to be the leading scorer of all time, and he's brought teams to the championships, to the finals that we would have never expected. So, he is my greatest player of all time on this list, and I think without the past few years, maybe it would be close, but these past few years passing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in points all time and continuing to have the longevity that he has, being the best longevity that we could arguably say in all of sports, up there with Tom Brady, over 20 years, putting up 25 points per game in his last season at age 39, and who knows how long he's going to continue to play, as he shot 40% from 3 this past season. Overall, LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time in my opinion, and like I said